That's why today we have here Juan José Santillán, one of our best teachers, that is going to talk about poetry and its application. How can we apply poetry in our classroom and all of these benefits? So let's give an applause to the teacher.
Thank you. All right, guys, thank you very much for being here. I'm happy to see some of my old students, some of my current students, and some new students as well. I'm happy that you didn't get tired of me and that you were not scared off by them. All right, so we're going to just talk about poetry today. We're going to divide the session in two parts. First, definition of poetry, types of poetry, the formal elements, and then a practical application that you can have in the classroom. All right? Good. All right, so what's poetry? Okay, it's supposed to work. It says that it works. Okay, so my professor in the United States defined poetry as an attempt to hold in language what is beyond language. Auden has called it memorable speech, and Borowai highlights the unbreakable relationship between sound and meaning. Okay, the origin of poetry, it's sound. The origin of poetry is meter. It originated because people needed to remember stuff. Okay, a perfect example of that is the poem of Raven that most of you have read already, and a tiger that you have also read. If you haven't read them, don't worry, we're just gonna go over them as well. Okay, in this case we have tiger, tiger burning bright in the forest of the night, what immortal hand of eye could frame that furious symmetry, in what distant deeps in skies burn the fire of thine eyes, on what wings there he aspire, that the hand there sees the fire. Okay, here the other poem, Tiger, it's about the conflict the author has, how the same God that created the lamb, an innocent animal, could create the tiger. How what the hell? How can God create the same thing, right? What's the origin of evil, in other words, okay? And here we have a portion of Raven. Distinctly I remember it was the bleak December, and each separate dying ember brought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished for the morrow, vainly had sought for borrow from my books sources of sorrow, sorrow from the lost Leonore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Leonore, nameless here forevermore. This poem, this is the progression of craziness, okay? How people go crazy, the progression of madness. And the speaker of the poem, the narrator, first hears, then sees a raven. And the idea of the poem is that the meter, we're going to talk a little bit about meter, of the poem reflects the same tapping that the raven has on the door. First he hears and someone is tapping on the door, tapping or rapping on the door. And you can see how meaning, this is perfect because the poem is about going crazy. Crazy people hear repetitive sounds. The narrator of the poem hears the tapping on the door of things, that he hears a tapping or a rapping on the door, and the meter of the poem, the rhythm of the poem, reflects the same tapping on the floor. Okay, very interesting as well. Both the poems reflect not a very common meter in English, but nevertheless it does the work. And also, this is one of my favorite poems. The thing is that we usually connect poetry with things that are lovely, that are eccentric, things that are, love, emotions, peace, etc., right? But Philip Larkin wrote this poem about his family. He didn't like his family a lot. He was on holiday with them, and he wrote this poem. They say, they fuck you up, your mom and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and not some extra just for you. Man has some misery to man, it deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can and don't have kids yourself. We don't have time, so in the middle of the poem, he also explains how his parents, or parents in general, as well, fucked up too. Say it is not their fault, it's their parents' fault. The parents that lived in the 20s that wear pants like this and wear hats, they also did evil on your parents. So that's why your parents are doing evil on you. Yeah, and one element of this is, and we will see that again and again, is that poetry, when you write a poem, you never tell, you need to show. Okay, that's one rule in poetry. You don't tell, you show. You don't explain, you show. And how it is that you show? You appeal to the senses. Okay, what are the 5 senses that we have, Ms. Gabriela?
Sight.
Sight, okay.
Toast. Hear and taste.
All right, good. What else? So it says sight, hearing, smell, taste. Okay, good. In these last 2 lines, now get out as early, man hands on misery to man, it deepens like a coastal shelf. Okay, what senses are being activated? Oh, when you read that, man hands on misery to man, it deepens like a coastal shelf. Basically saying, if you are sad, you're a little bit less sad because somebody else is going to be worse than you. Right? Have you said in Spanish, se llama, como es mal de muchos, consuelo de tontos, right? Yeah, that's what he's trying to say. Okay, man hands on misery to man. Your parents were sad, so now they want you to be sad. Obviously, he didn't like his parents, okay? Yeah, so it deepens like a coastal shelf. This is something that is never going to change. You don't see it. It's like a coastal shelf. It's not saying, it will happen. You don't see it. He doesn't use any fancy words, but say it deepens like a coastal shelf. Like when you go to the beach and then you see a shell, and the shell deepens little by little until you don't see it, right? So it activates senses. It activates the senses of touch because it's coastal shelf. You go to the beach, the water, the sand, the deepening of it, okay? So again, always remember, when poetry is all about showing, it never tells, it's showing, okay? Now, poetry, the defining characteristics of poem is that it always means more than it actually says. The author of the poem has an intention, and the intention is not directly shown in the poem. The words have a meaning, but they also have a hidden meaning. It goes beyond. It always goes beyond the explicit text. It always dwells in your memory. It means poetry is meant to be remembered. You read a poem, if you read a good poem, it's meant to be remembered. You're going to remember that. And it will prompt you to articulate the words. Even when you're reading a poem, you don't read them silently. If you're around people, you mumble the words. But a good poem has to have these 3 characteristics. Okay, it has to go beyond the meaning, it has to be remembered, and it will make you articulate it. It will make you read, you will want it to read it aloud. Otherwise, it's not a good poem. Good poems are read aloud, are meant to be read aloud. Okay, remember the origin of poem that you already saw was Beowulf, or most of you already saw was Beowulf. What was the meaning of having the story written in poetry? Why was it written in poetry? Who remembers? Why? They could have written in prose, but no, they wrote it in poetry. Why was it written in poetry? Who remembers that? Because it was easier to remember, okay? They didn't have any writing, so it was passed down from generation to generation, so they needed to remember. So all the beats of the poem were meant to be remembered. The same thing happens with Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote, Mallory, but we know Shakespeare. He wrote in blank verse, iambic pentameter, so it was meant to be remembered. Poems are meant to be remembered, and meter helps to remember the poem. That's why, in my perspective, modern poetry is not really poetry, because if it is not metered, then it's not poetry. But some people will argue that it is. Okay, so poems are divided into 2 elements based on how each line is constructed. Okay, you have formal verse and then you have free verse. Okay, formal verse encloses a poem that use the effect of meter, rhyme, and form. And they also have fixed forms. Okay, for example, you have the haiku, you have the sonnet, you have the villanelle, you have the sestina. If you're taking masterpieces too, you have read a lot of sonnets, right? I hope that you read a lot of sonnets, okay, because that's the basic structure that we usually connect with poems, but there are many of them, okay? The villanelle is one of my favorite. We're going to see as well some examples of it. Rhyme, the Encyclopedia Britannica calls rhyme as the correspondence of 2 or more sounds within similar sounding final syllables, placed so as to echo one another. Okay, you can have internal rhyme or you can have end rhyme. You read The Raven. and in the raven you have internal rhyme. The second sound of the line will rhyme with the second to last sound, and it will cause an effect. Okay, most of the rhymes that we know, they will echo just at the end. And there are different types of rhyme. You have a masculine rhyme, or which is a perfect rhyme. For example, you have light and bright. You also have what we know as feminine rhyme, which is a perfect rhyme, but it has 2 syllables. You have flower, bower, tower. The accent, or the accent is here. And then you say flower, bower, tower, and creo que se movió alguna. Yes, right? But it is still perfect rhyme. You can also have slant rhymes, rhymes that are not perfect but are meant to echo each other. For example, the consonant sounds don't agree, right? But it's still a type of rhyme. For example, you have temperate and you have date. This is Shakespeare in Sonnet 18, right? So these are the types of rhyme. If you have any questions, let me know, because these are basic terms, but may be obscure for some people. So far, so good? Yes, most of you have already seen this already, so hopefully. Okay, so meter can be defined, and you have this in your book. I love this because it's very interesting. This is English meter, right? Meter can be defined, English meter, or accentual syllabic meter, can be defined as the systematic arrangement of unstressed and stressed syllables within a sound, within a line of poetry. We will, in this class, or this session, we just focus on the accentual syllabic meter, but keep in mind that there are different types of meter. For example, you have the numerical meter, which is using Greek and Roman epics. Okay, you have the syllabic meter, which is we use in Spanish. You just count the syllables, right? You just count the syllables, and there are rules. If the word ends in an aguda, then you add a syllable. If the word ends in a grave, you keep it. If the word ends in esdrújula, you subtract the syllable, right? So you just count the syllables because you just, that's the system, right? And you have the accentual meter, which is what you read in Beowulf, right? It doesn't matter how many syllables you have. What matters is how many bits you have in each line, in each half of the line. Usually there are 2 in one half and 2 in another half of the line, okay? But it's a little bit more complex than that. And then you have the accentual syllabic meter, which mixes both. Well, it's not only how many syllables you have, but the way the accent and the stressed and unstressed syllables are arranged within that sign of within the line of poetry, and that is what we do. The basics for that is basis for that is what we know as poetic foot. Okay, a poetic foot is an element composed of 1 stressed syllable and 1 unstressed syllable, or 2 or more unstressed syllables in a specific order. We're going to see them. Okay, yeah. The basic poetic fit in English is the I am. You have unstressed stress. For example, you say research, right? I know you can also say research, right? But you're focusing on the verb, so you say research. Or you can say above, right? You have unstressed stress. Remember that they also travel across word boundaries. We're going to see that. Okay, trochee is the opposite. You have cell phone, is stress and stress. And then you have understand. For example, that's an anapest. You have understand. 2 unstressed, and then you have unstressed, and dactyl, because it resembles your finger. You have general. You have 1 stress, unstressed, unstressed, like your finger. Okay. So based on that, and the meter of English works on how many of these building blocks you can put within a line of poetry. If you have 5 of these, then you have iambic pentameter, right? Which is, as you know, the most common type of meter in English. Most English is written in iambic pentameter. If you have, for example, raven was written in a trochaic octometer, 8 trochees within a line of poetry. Okay, and then you have anapestic. There is a poem written by Poe in anapestic and dactylic meter as well, but it doesn't have that effect. It's not that common, but they are there. Okay, the present, as I said, a specific number of these will give you the type of rhyme. For example, iambic pentameter means that you have 5 of these. We're going to see an example as well, like this. All of you know this poem, right? Yep. So, for example, you have, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? That's an iambic pentameter, because you have 5 of these. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? Now, where is this from? You know. Just to connect how it always means more than it says. We're going to see it. But what is the number? It comes from Shakespeare, but what is the number of the sonnet? Sonnet 18, okay? Sonnet 18. Now, what is obscure about this poem? The poem is about love, right? It says, you're more beautiful than a summer's day. You're more beautiful. You're so beautiful because your beauty is never going to die, because I'm writing these lines, and these lines are going to make you live forever. Now, what is obscure about this poem, though? I think I have it. I have the complete here. Let's see if I have it more. No, I don't have it. No, I don't have it. No, this is better. We're going to see that. Yeah, but what is in shall I compare thee to a summer's day that are more lovely and more tender? What is the obscure part in the meaning? No, the last part is pretty simple, right? Because it says, so long as man can see and eyes can, so as man can breathe and eyes can see, so long lives this, and gives life to this. But it's basically saying this poem is going to make your beauty last forever. So that's why you're better than the sun. Okay? But what's obscure about that poem? You read it. I know you read it because Rommel asked me about it. So I know you read it. And you were my student, so I know you read it. So you don't remember. I did a bad job if you don't remember. You don't know if it is meant for a man or for a woman.
It's for a man because it usually refers to.
Is it for a man? What specific line of the poem shows you that it's for a man?
I don't remember, but I think he mentions a friend.
No, it never mentions a friend. Never mentions a man. Never mentions a, it's very obscure. Yes, it was meant to praise Lord Southampton, and that's why people say Shakespeare was gay. But there's nothing in the poem that actually shows love for that. So the poem was intentionally obscured. You can read the poem and think about your boyfriend, or you can read the poem and think about a girlfriend. It's very obscure. Actually, the only sexually explicit poems that Shakespeare wrote were about a woman. Okay, so yes, it's obscure. The meaning is obscure. Okay, it always means more than it actually says. Remember that. And in the other, we can see tiger, tiger, burning bright. We see that from William Blake. Okay, then you have 1, 2, 3, and 4. You have 4, and then you have an orphan here, which is one you're missing, but you know that is there. So it's still how you organize poetry, how you organize meter. Okay, that's why when you understand this kind of thing, you understand that writing a poem in English and in Spanish is pretty similar. It's not just pouring your feelings into a sheet of paper and giving it a weird look and using bad words or strange words, right? It works way more than that. It's really crafting, okay? Escansion is the process by which you detect the meter of a poem. Okay, you're giving a poem and then you're supposed to detect the meter of the poem. Yeah, my teacher used to say that it is an art often confused with a science. Okay, it's not scientific, it's an art. We're going to see why it is an art. Okay, yeah. Beside that, we have a very nice example of it. This is for Lord Byron. He says, she walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies. What is the meter of that? It's simple, right? The poem is really nice. It says, she walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meeting her aspects and her eyes. Okay? It's a very nice poem. Yeah, Lord Byron, he was not a nice person, but he wrote really nice poems. How many feet do you see there? So you say, she walks in beauty like the night. So what is the form? Is it an iamb, a trochee? What is it? It's an iamb, okay? It's an iamb. How many iambs? You have 8 syllables. But in an iamb, how many syllables you have? You have 2. So 8 divided by 2, it's 4. So it's iambic tetrameter because it has 4, right? You have 1 here, she walks in beauty. And here you can see how it moves across word boundaries. See, you have she walks, 1 in 1 word, but also you have 1 iamb between here and here because you say in beauty. Y se sigue moviendo eso, right? Yeah. Yeah. All right. So in beauty like the night, right, of cloudless climes. And here you have 1 here of cloud is 1, right? And you say cloudless climes, right? There's another one, right? So it moves across word boundaries. It's not easy to find the meter of a poem, okay? This one is a little bit more difficult. It says, for the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful animal Lee. It's easy, right? Just at the beginning, say, for the moon never beams without bringing me dreams, right? What was it? What was that? Remember? You have two unstressed, one stressed. It's an anapest. It's an anapest, right? So you see, writing poems in English is not easy at all, right? Yeah, and then it gives you respect for the people who did that. Yeah, because it gets more complicated than that. Okay, we're going to see, it gets, Paul Fossil, he wrote probably the best book about poetic meter, and the name of his book is Poetic Meter and Poetic Form. He was a sailor. It's a very short book, but he says that to write a poem is sometimes less to arrange ideas and assertions than to manipulate meters. So a lot of people, I have a friend, and this friend, well, he's not my friend anymore, yeah, but he used to say, I don't like writing in meter because it constrains me. It's like a jail. I cannot express myself. And well, the answer is he can't express himself in a good way. He just wants to express himself in a disoriented and distorted way. A lot of people think that meter will put you like in a cage, and it's difficult to move in that cage, but it's not. Right? It's just a matter of how skillful a poet is. If a poet gives up and prefers free verse, probably it's because he's not good enough to write free verse, formal verse. Okay? And I'm not saying that Walt Whitman is a bad writer. Yeah, I'm saying that there are better writers than him. Okay? Yeah, but the point is that you need to avoid metrical metonymy. Because if your poem has the same meter all the time and it's always repeated, then you will bore your readers. Your readers will become bored. And that's why we have substitutive feet. All right? The four that I show you, the anapest, the dactyl, the iamb, and the trochee are the main ones. But instead of those, you can have substitutions. These substitutions, you cannot make a whole line with them, but instead of having a trochee, you can have a pyrrhic, right? Instead of having an iamb, you can have a spondy, right? So they have specific meanings, okay? And we will see, and also you have what is called a metrical turn. I'm going to see a specific example of that. Okay, and a spondic substitution is a succession of stressed syllables. Okay, instead of having an expected unstressed syllable, you have one stressed syllable. And that shows slowness, weight, and difficulty. For example, you say slow, fresh, found. Right? The poem is meant to be slow. And the meter makes the poem slow. And the word, the poem, is talking about slowness. So it matches. Okay, every metrical substitution has to be justified in meaning. We're going to see another one. A pyrrhic substitution is a succession of unstressed syllables. Right? You have a lot of unstressed syllables where you're supposed to have unstressed syllables. So that will cause your poem to be quick. Okay, it has rapidity, swiftness. And for example, Sonnet 43 by Edna St. Vincent, in that sonnet, she is confessing to having had many lovers. Okay, say I was unfaithful. And somebody is trying to get into our presentation, okay? She was saying that she had many lovers, that she was unfaithful. And when you confess something like that, you don't want everybody to hear. You don't want to do it slowly, right? You wanted to do it like kind of a whisper, very quickly. So again, you see how the meter, the substitutions, they coincide with what the poem is saying. And that is not a coincidence. It's built on conscious effort by the writers. Okay? And you have a rhythmical turnaround, which is a sudden movement. For example, you expect to have an iamb because all the poem was about iambs, and then out of the blue, you have a trochee. Okay? And that shows a shift in meaning. We're going to see a specific example of that. Yeah, I'm sorry they have to move like that, but my computer is old. Yeah. So I love this poem. Yeah, I have shared it with my classmates a lot. Yeah, so you knew, those who were my students know this poem. Okay, it's a poem written by Robert Frost, probably his most famous poem. Yes, it was used in a stupid movie about vampires, but Yes, they should sue him, right? They should sue the movies. Why would you use them in that movie? Yeah, well, I don't care. Yeah, it's a bad movie. Don't watch the movie. Don't read the books. Don't watch the movie. They're the very things to do. All right. So the poem is lovely, right? It says, some say the word would end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. Now, what we're analyzing here is that all the poem is iambic. For example, this is, some say the word would end in fire. That's iamb, right? Some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. So you expect that it's going to hit this do-dam all the time. But here you have an stress. It says but. So instead of having an I am, you have a trochee here. Why? Porque ya se le quedó sin palabras, right? Because he ran out of words. He couldn't do it, probably. No, but do you understand what is happening? ¿Sí entiende lo que está pasando aquí, right? The whole poem you have I ams, right? And out of the blue you have a trochee. Why? To change the mood. Yeah, that's perfect, to change the mood. But even more specific is because you're changing the topic. The whole part of the poem is about fire. And then the second part is about ice. So he's signaling that not only with words, with the meaning, not only with a contrastive bat, because bat shows contrast, but also with a meter. You say, look, I'm going to be talking about something else. And then, well, obviously, then it also continues in iambs, but the presence of this bat, it also signals metrically that you're going to be talking about something else. So you can divide a poem in two. Okay? Good. Yeah, it's not changing the mood, but yes, actually it shows a change of the meaning of the poem. Very good. Okay? Good. The fixed forms that we talk about are a sonnet has 14 lines, a sonnet has 14 lines, and the meter, okay, we're focusing on the English sonnet, on the Shakespearean sonnet. As you know, we also have the Petrarchan sonnet, which was brought from Italy, but then Henry Howard changed the meter, right? So it will be more adaptable to English, right? So you have these rhymes. You have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, G, right? Yeah, in the Petrarchan sonnet, what you have is A, B, A, C, D, right? And the build of the poem is different, right? And also you have, notice what you have is how they are arranged. You have 1, 2, 3 stanzas, 4 quatrains, 3 quatrains, and then you have a couplet. You have at the end, which is called the turn. Usually in a poem, it brings the poem to a nice conclusion. It's like a summary of the poem in which it is brought to a nice conclusion. So we're going to see how that works as well. Okay? And we have another one, which is a villanelle, which has 19 lines, and it has 2 refrains. A refrain is a word or a line that is repeated. Okay? So you have A, B, A. This is the first refrain. Yeah? And then you have... Yeah, you have ABA, and then you have ABA. The same line that you have here is repeated here. And then you have ABA, the same line is repeated here. Ideally, it's the same line. We're going to see that also can change. And then it's repeated here, and then the 2 lines meet at the end. Okay? Yeah, this is an example of a sonnet. This is a very nice sonnet. You read it, right? You read it. Yeah, this semester. You're supposed to have read it. Yeah, this is a poem by Shakespeare. It talks about love. It says, let me not to the marriage of true minds and need impediments. Love is not love which alter with inalteration fans or bends with the remover to remove. Saying, even if someone cheats on you, love doesn't end. That's the remove, right? The remover to remove. Okay? Yeah, oh no, it's an ever-fixed mar that looks on tempest and is never shaken. It is the start to every wandering bar whose word is unknown, although his height be taken. Okay? And at the end, he's basically telling you what is love, right? And what is not love. Okay, and this part, he then warms up, right? And then he says, love's not time full, though rosy lips and cheek with things his bending circles compass come. Saying, you love someone when they're pretty, right? But the rosy lips and the cheeks, they come within the ciclo, como la guadaña, right, of time. Okay, love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the age of doom. And this is the turn. So he spent 14 lines talking about what love is and what love is not, and then at the turn he says, if this be error and upon me proved, and never read and no man ever loved. So the turn is supposed to bring the poem to a conclusion. He's saying all of this is love, right? If it's not true, then no one has loved, and I have never read. And he was a famous writer. He made a living by writing. So he's basically saying, it's true in another way. Okay, so you understand the turn, the construction here. Yeah, and then also you need to understand that the way we pronounce words are not the same. People in Shakespeare's time pronounce words. So that's why proved rhymes with loved. Okay? Yeah, you will say prove and love, it doesn't rhyme, but it rhymes, in that time rhymes. Okay? And this is a very good example of Villanelle. Okay? Do not go gentle into that good night. Okay? This was written by Dylan Thomas. A lot of people think that it was written for his dying father, after his father died, but he wrote this before his father died, probably when he was diagnosed with cancer, so it even gives more meaning. Because it says, don't die peacefully. Right? It's not okay. You're supposed to be angry that you're dying. Well, I'm angry that you're dying. You're supposed to be angry. All they should burn and rave on close of day, rage against the dying of the light. And then he says, wise men rage, they do not go gentle. Wise men at their end know narc is right, because their words have fork no lighting, they do not go gentle into that good night. Even wise men, they know that they're supposed to die, but when they die, when they're about to die, they realize that they haven't changed shit. That being wise didn't work. They didn't do any good, so they do not go gentle into the good night. They don't die peacefully. Okay? Good men the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay, rage against the dying of the light. Okay, basically, good men say, I did a lot of good things, and they would have been great, but they are not. They didn't change anything, so they do not go gentle into the good night. They rage against the dying of the light. While men who caught and sang the song in flight and learned too late, they grieve on its way, do not go gentle into that good night. Crazy guys who do whatever they want, they also repent of that, and they do not die peacefully. Grave men near death, who see with blinding sight of blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Gay meaning happy. Okay? They also, grave men, they realize that they shouldn't have been so serious, right? They could have been happier, and they repent that. And then, again, the last stanza brings the poem into a conclusion and says, and you, my father, there on the sad height, a chorus, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage against the dying of the light. He's saying his dad. He's saying you shouldn't take this news cautiously. You should be angry, like I am angry. Why aren't you angry? Like he's getting angry with it. But you can see how the Villanelle works. It's a French poem. It's a French type of poem. The same with the sonnet is Italian. This was French. Was brought into England. Okay, in the Renaissance. Remember, there is no such thing as the English form of poetry, right? They usually take someone and take something from somewhere else and make it better. Okay, English people are like that. So you can see this is a refrain, right? This is supposed to repeat, etc. Okay, and this is a very good example. And then what we're going to use in an example of a lesson plan on one art. Okay, it's basically is the art of losing. Okay, we don't have time to read everything about it, but what I want you to see is that she doesn't repeat all of the lines. She repeats just the last word. You see how in this poem, all the line is repeated, right? This is repeated here, here, and here, and this line is also repeated. But in this poem, she only repeats here, here, only master, right? Master, and then disaster, etc. Okay? Y no sé por qué se está moviendo de la nada. Okay. So this is a very nice poem. It talks about the art of losing. Losing is easy. Is not a difficult art to master. The art of losing is not hard to master. And then she also repeated here, it's not too hard to master. Okay? Now, this is in opposition to free verbs, to formal verbs, we have what is called free verse. It's a modern form of poetry. It doesn't follow meter. It doesn't have a fixed pattern. It just follows the natural rhythms of a speech. It doesn't mean that it's not good, but in my perspective, it's not as good. Okay, but you may like free verse better. Modern poetry, most modern poetry is written in free verse. Okay, everything you pick up now is written in free verse. Some of it is really good, some of them is not good at all. It's not even poetry. Yeah, it doesn't mean anything but formal verse. Okay, free verse is not really free. Now, there are other mechanics that you have to follow, should follow. This is from Walt Whitman. He's really famous for his free verse, right? This is when you have a boring class, right, like literature. Then you say, when I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were arranged in columns before me, so the teacher is explaining everything about the stars, right, in the blackboard. I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them. When I sit and heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon and unaccountable I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. Because basically saying the teacher was really boring, he knew a lot, he was explaining anything, but I went out and I caught sight of the sky, which was better. Now, notice as well that when he does that, he repeats, right? There's a lot of repetition here, right? Yeah, this is one element of free verse. You don't have meter, you have repetition, which even makes it more difficult because you have to make repetitions, they have to mean something. They have to echo something. You just not can repeat things by itself or just to add emphasis, right? Yeah. Again, you need to avoid metonymy. For example, you have enjambment. Enjambment is when one line, or the idea of one line goes into the second line. It's not that you end each line in a sentence, but the sentence continues into the following line. Okay? Yeah, line breaks, you're supposed to break the line unexpectedly, sometimes, for example, between the verb and the object, or between the subject and the verb, so it gets attention. Then you have repetitions and the sudden appearance of meter. Okay, Oliver says that free verse is, of course, not free. There are other elements at bay there. Yeah, there are principles for, the Fossil gives two principles for reading and analysis. There's always a uniqueness of metrical pattern. I mean, when you're writing a poem, when you read a poem, you need to realize that the meter that the poem has is the only one that the poem was meant to have. Because every single change that you add into the poem should have a meaning. As we saw an example of Fire and Ice, and we saw an example of Sonnet 14, you cannot just make changes to make changes. They need to mean something. Okay? Any variations must have a justification in meaning, in the meaning of the poem. Okay? It shouldn't be, I didn't find a word that rhymed with this. I didn't find a meter for this, right? It needs to echo in the meaning, in the whole meaning of the poem. Okay? You have the example in the movie industry. There are the conventions that are needed. When you watch, as I said, when you watch a movie, you know that if the camera is looking at a specific key, then you know that the key is important, right? Salen todos corriendo del cuarto, right? And they forgot something. And then they zoom into that, oh, that's gonna be important, right? Yeah, there's kind of movie conventions, right? You see, there is, you know that you're watching a horror movie, and there is a dark room. You know that they're going to go into the dark room, right? Because that's a convention. Even though it's stupid, but it's a convention, right? Yeah. Now, why should you care? Why is this important? I don't remember your name, I'm sorry. Yes? Valeria. Valeria? Belén. Yeah, I'm sorry. Why is this important?
Because we should know it's part of the language that we are learning and that we are going to teach.
Exactly.
Necessary to be able to explain, that we should be able to explain our students or incorporate this that is very important.
Yeah, exactly. The language if you're an English teacher, you're supposed to be an expert in English. You just shouldn't know English superficially, right? And as I said before, that is what separates, especially you in this university, from other majors, okay? There is no other major in the country or in Latin America that has the complexities that your major has. Okay, most of them just focus on English and didactics and pedagogy and TEFL, right? But you have that, you have English, you have pedagogy, you have TEFL, you have linguistics, you have humanities, you have everything. So that's good. It makes you a good teacher. I don't know, for example, if you ask me in Spanish, and I always give the example, if you ask me in Spanish, why do I say hubiera instead de hubiese? Si me dice, si yo hubiese sabido, si yo hubiera sabido, ¿cuándo utilizo cada cual? ¿Por qué? ¿Cuál es la decisión? Yo no sé, right? And that's okay because I don't teach Spanish. Okay, but you're supposed to know everything about English because you teach English. So that's a very good point. Thank you, Belén. Yeah, I'm sorry they didn't remember your name. Yeah, I have a lot of. Okay, so why I have a lot of students? So I'm sorry. Yeah, now particularly in English teaching, there is a lot. The problem is that there is a lack of research on the topic. People don't research about poetry. And the reason is that poetry usually reflects what people think about it. For example, you say, I don't like poetry, my students are not going to like poetry. So why would I do that today? Okay? You don't know if they're going to like it or not. Because you don't like it, you suppose that they don't like it. And the same thing happens with everything. Right? And the same thing happens with everything. And in English teaching, that happens quite very often. You're reading and learning about of TEFL, and I hope that neither in your books nor your teacher will tell you, you don't need to teach grammar. Have you heard that? Say, learn English without grammar. Yeah, that's because they don't know grammar. So they say that it's not important, but it is important. Okay, if somebody says that grammar is not important, it's because they don't know grammar. Okay, at least not to teach it. Okay, so there's a lot of empirical evidence that shows that writing poems, reading poems, including poems into the classroom brings a lot of benefits. And again, we're going to see what are those benefits, okay? First of all, you have language development. Through poems, you can practice grammar, you can acquire vocabulary, you can develop linguistic awareness, okay, of the changes of the language, of the uses of the language, and then you can transfer that into another genre. Okay, what you learn in poetry, you can transfer into something else. Okay, all of these authors, all of them have found this. Okay, yeah, and then when you also have academic and writing academic literacy, remember that there are two elements, right? You have the basic interpersonal communication, but you also have the academic one. There are two levels of proficiency, and you can actually develop academic literacy through poem. Okay, there is a positive influence of academic literacy development. Poetry, believe it or not, people who study that and then they give it to their students, they realize that the students say, well, okay, I thought it was difficult, but now I know that it's feasible, that it's possible, that I can do it. And that brings motivation, because when your students perform in poetry, they are performing into something that is socially accepted as difficult. Okay, everybody, people may not like poem or poetry, but everybody agrees that poetry is, it reflects an elevated or a higher use of language. So if you ask them to perform in that, then you're saying, okay, you can do something with the language that is socially acceptable as difficult. Okay? And is socially accepted as difficult, I'm sorry. Okay? I don't know, to give you this example, I don't know how many of you like Friends. ¿Les gusta ver esa serie Friends? Nunca les gusta ver Friends. No, es de otra época entonces, right? Okay, so there's these two guys, he's playing a game and the game was too easy. So he said, okay, let's make it difficult, because if you make it difficult, it counts. Okay, if you do something easy, it doesn't count that much. So your students, most people realize that. Okay? Now, there is a successful interpretation of figurative language and poetic devices. Okay, the meaning, the idea that the words go beyond the original or the intent or literal meaning. Okay, poetry gives you that, and you need that in language. You need to understand, pragmatically speaking, you need to understand the intentions and the meaning of that go beyond the specific meaning. Okay, to give a very specific example, if somebody says you're having dinner, if somebody says, is there any salt? Is he asking for a yes/no answer, or is he asking for salt? For salt, right? For example, if I say, Michael, what time is, do you know what time is it? And Michael says yes. right? It's not enough, right? So this is you study that in pragmatics. You're studying that in pragmatics, right? There's a locutionary force, illocutionary force, and elocutionary force, where you actually get with the language. And poetry allows you to figure that out, okay? Through poems, you can personalize and you can promote emotional engagement, okay? You incorporate personal experience into the learning experience. You make learning personal. You provide opportunities for self-expression, self-discovery, and emotional release. Okay, students see that they can do that with the language. Okay, and there is this real ownership of the target language. You know, it's a shift from form to meaning. They realize that that they are not only expected, or they can not only be accurate with the language. You know, that the learning English, in this case, is not only learning the rules, you know, don't forgetting the S in the third person, you know, using the subjunctive correctly the other day, right? It's not only that, but English could be a language that I can use by myself to express something else, something personal, something internal, and that is real ownership of the language. Okay, now there is a big debate, you know, who owns English, right? And Whittle says, well, everybody does, right? And it's an individual ownership. If you take the language, if you shape it and you mold it to your needs, then the language is yours. And people who do that, you know, saying English is not only the language that I have to learn, English is not only the language of commerce, the language that I have to write my thesis on, language of scientific, you know, literature, but the language that I can use to express my personal ideas and emotions. And that's real ownership, okay? There is, of course, when you realize that, there is motivation improvement, and there's obviously retention enhancement, okay? People remember better, okay? There is, and you can obviously, there is a promotion of HATS, it's higher order thinking skills, metacognition, and critical thinking, okay? Poetry does that. You promote communicative competence and critical thinking. People actually, they go beyond the original meaning, and they connect things. For example, you analyze a poem in depth, you will wonder, like we were discussing about Shakespeare, you know, was he gay, was he not gay? You know, what's wrong with that? Was it wrong now? Was it wrong before? What happened, right? You promote that. Why should it bother me if it's not, right? That's critical thinking. And then you develop self-awareness as well. And there is a data for self-understanding. You can use your own poems to understand yourself, okay? And now we're going to go into how you can incorporate poems into the classroom. And this is brought from an article that I wrote with Professor Fabian Rodas. You have them. You have him, right? Yeah, he was my teacher too. He's a very good teacher. We wrote it together, and we published it in an Argentinian magazine. Okay. The idea this is planned for a 2-hour lesson, 2 hours, but in 2 separate days. Okay, the idea is supposed that you cannot bring a poem, you know, you cannot ask your students to write a poem in 1 day. That's impossible. Okay, so at least you need to give them 2 sessions. Better if you say, we will start this on Monday and we will finish it on Friday. Okay, that will be better, you give them more time, but you cannot expect this lesson to be, linearly, right? In linear fashion, okay? You engage your students emotionally and intellectually through poetry, you stimulate creative expression to sensory experiences, you guide the students in writing and sharing original poems. This is what you want to do at the end, and you encourage constructive and respectful feedback, which is really good, okay? Yeah, when I lived in the United States, we got this poetry class, which is really good. Albert Gotti was my teacher, and we used to criticize the other poems, right? And the teacher was really clear in the rules. At the very beginning, he says, you read something, I know there are things that you're not going to like, I know there are things you're going to think that are stupid, just don't say it. Okay, just hold it to yourself. Yeah, and he said, no, there are many times that I, as a teacher, want to say, no, that's just dumb, but I cannot do that. Okay, you are going to, when you become teachers, you're going to do that. I'm sure you want to do that. Yeah, so I don't know. If it happens to you, I don't know, right? But you're not supposed to show it, right? And sometimes it's difficult. Yes, it's difficult, right? Yeah. For example, the other day, I was showing my other students, getting them to guess to descriptions of people, and there's this group of students could not recognize the major of Cuenca. So I showed them a picture of what is his name, Christian Zamora, and they didn't know. They didn't know who he was. And I had pictures of Nelson Mandela, and I said, no, change activity. You're not going to know that, right? You want to say something, but you can't. So yes, you need to encourage them to be respectful in their feedback. As a teacher, you learn to do that, right? For example, the first thing one of the teachers says is never point to the student, right? If you don't know the name, like I didn't know the name, go like that, okay? They give you these tips on giving feedback and be respectful. Your students don't know that. So you need to tell them, you need to encourage them not to do that. And if you're working with teenagers, that is especially difficult because teenagers are evil, okay? Yeah, you were teenagers, so you were evil. Yeah, everybody was a teenager, okay? I skipped that stage in my life, so I was not evil. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is to introduce the topic, okay? This lesson is going to be based on the poem that we mentioned, is One Art by Elizabeth Bishop, okay? Yeah, the idea, so you start with opening activities. For example, the teacher can share a personal story about loss. You need to be careful because it's a delicate topic, right? You don't want to say, when my grandmother died, because that could be really personal for students, right? You don't want them crying, right? In high school, you're going to get in trouble. Luego le mandan a la junta cantonal. So you need to be careful with that, right? A teacher made me cry. Yeah, I had a friend. He's a good writer. He's one of the few modern writers that I respect. He was a teacher at one private high school here. Yeah, and he brought, he was teaching them the poem The Raven. And there is a movie based on The Raven. So he brought the movie. Right? And he showed the movie to the students. They were high schoolers. They were like in, 11th grade, quinto curso, right? No es quinto curso, ¿cómo dicen ustedes? Segundo de bachillerato, right? Yeah, and then he got in trouble. He was kicked out of the school because one student said, I maybe had bad dreams. I had nightmares because of the movie. So you need to be very careful, okay? Yes, and especially nowadays, you need to be very careful, okay? Yeah, so the teacher can share a personal story, and you can ask, for example, could be a wither plant. I have a personal story. I bought an orchid, right? And I like the orchid, and this is a real story. And then my wife said, I wonder why it is that your orchid had so many flowers, and the next day she accidentally dropped my orchid. Okay, and this is a real story. I still don't think it was an accident. Okay, but she doesn't want to confess it. Yeah, but I can say that, and I was sad, and how I felt. Okay, when you do this, you need to be very careful. Again, not to tell, but to show. When you're telling the story, you should tell me. When I heard the pot breaking, it hurt in my stomach. Okay, so that's better than saying I feel sad, right? So you need to show these emotions, this appealing to the senses. You need to wake the student's senses because poetry is based on senses. Okay, then you have group reflections, how people experience loss differently, right? Some people get angry, some people get frustrated, some people don't say anything, some people cry, some people yell, and then you can discuss about that. Okay, obviously this is for a mature class. You don't do that. You don't do this with children. Yeah, it goes without saying. Sometimes it doesn't. Okay, then the next part is when you have engagement, when you actually bring the poem. Okay, you don't just say read the poem like I did because you're adults. Yeah, but you're working with the students. You can say, okay, this is the title of the poem, One Art. What do you think the poem is going to be about? Okay, and then they make predictions, and then you read the poem. And then you ask them to read the poem silently, and then you read them out loud. And then you may need to give some vocabulary explanation. Okay, I know that some people say, don't use translation. Probably your TEFL teacher says never use translation. But sometimes you will realize when you teach students that are not from your major, you're going to need that. And sometimes it's quicker, right? You cannot spend like 10 minutes explaining a word if translation would be easier, right? So be careful with that as well. You can actually also provide a brief clarification of the complexities of certain lines. For example, where it was you meant to travel. Okay, obviously here you have a weird construction. What is the name of the construction? You studied syntax last semester. Syntax 2. Debieron haber estudiado esta. ¿Cómo se llama esto de it was you meant to travel? Where it was you meant to travel. El it, ¿no se acuerdan? What is the semantic role of it here? No? Empty, very good, thank you, Andres. Yes, it's empty, it's nothing, right? It's a cleft, you're adding because it sounds nice, okay? You could explain that saying, don't worry about this it, okay? Yeah, again, depending on the maturity of your class. Then you read the poem and then you explain the formal features. For example, depending on your students, you can focus on the meter, on the form of the villanelle. One art is a villanelle. So instead of focusing on the meter, you may focus on, look how these words are repeated and how they change and how she includes something at the end or whatever, right? You just focus on what you know your class is going to like. Because if you explain what I explained to you to people who are not studying English, who don't know anything about it as a profession, then they're not going to be interested. You may not be interested, but now you're here, okay? And then, for example, you have mastery and disaster, which is the repetition. There you have a group discussion from 7 to 5 minutes in which the students are supposed to share in group, not in a whole class, but in a group. Sometimes it's better if they share in a group. Yeah, what's their interpretation? What are their interpretations of the poem? Okay, what the meaning, the drawing from them, what is the thing that they like the most, etc. Okay, answers should not be challenged. Okay, you should not say, you're wrong. Yeah, they might be wrong, of course. Yeah, but you don't challenge that. Okay, yeah, and then stage number 3, you go into the stimulus of your senses. Okay, remember, always showing, not telling. We're going to see an example of this that it makes to show you the importance of that. Okay, we read the poem the other day with some of my classmates, some of my students, but and you're reading this poem. Yeah. Alan told me that you were reading this poem. Yeah, hope is the thing with feathers. Okay, if I ask you, what is hope? Can you define hope? What is hope for you, Brittany? Can you provide a definition of hope? Yeah, probably Emily Dickinson had the same problem. She couldn't define hope because she couldn't explain hope, so she decided to show hope. Okay, so she says hope is the thing with feathers that perches to the soul, right? And sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and in the strangest sea, hasta cuando estudian de etimología, right? Even then I heard hope. Yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. So as you see, every single line of the poem, it appeals to the senses. Right? Because, for example, say hope is the thing with feathers. Right? Notice that just hope is the thing with feathers. Then feather is actually stimulating your senses, the senses of touch. You have lightness, and then you have the tickling of feathers, right? And then you say that perches to the soul. Perches, if you understand, perches is how birds stand on a pole, right? Como se paran las gallinas or los pájaros, right? And then even then you see the lightness, and you can feel, the little paw, paws, birds have paws, right? Yeah, I don't know, claws, the little claws, right? And how you can feel how they do that. So everything is about feeling, right? And then it's about singing, yeah, sweet. And there's this antithesis, right? This is, antithesis when you put opposing senses that are supposed to be. For example, sweet is something that you taste, but you can also hear it. How can you hear sweet? Okay, my song says, papi, esto me sabe amarillo. Y no entiendo qué me dices. Right? No entiendo qué es, pero eso es antítesis, right? O papi, te escuché rojo. No entiendo, right? Yeah, so they do that, right? Yeah, so she does that. And then sweet is in the gale. Gale is a very strong wind. So even then you can, again, all the senses are stimulated because you can hear the wind, but you can also feel it. Okay, and the whole point. So poetry is always about sharing, right? Yeah, it's not, it's showing, it's not telling. It shouldn't tell. It's always showing. Okay, so you need to make questions that will activate their senses. For example, the first one is, when it was the last time that you remember losing something? Because in the poem, she says, I lost a key, then I lost a trip, then I lost a car, but then I lost you, right? So she's saying, you know, losing, you know, you get good at losing by losing something. You know, first you lost a key, then you lose a person, right? But you lose something, right? And then you miss it, and then she plays with words, miss and lose as well. So you say, what was the last time that you lost something? Yeah, I was looking for my wallet. That's losing, right? That's losing, yeah? Where were you? ¿Dónde estaba? Where were you? Where were you when you lost something? Yeah, were you alone? Was it, and then the sense, was it cold or hot? Was it cold or hot? Did you hear anything? What did you hear when you were losing something? Yeah, did you smell something in particular? And where did it hurt? Where did it hurt when you lost something? Yeah, when you feel, for example, when you're sad, sad, you know, what feelings can you attach, or what sensations can you attach to sadness? When you're sad, sometimes you feel a pain in your stomach, right? You're really sad, or maybe sometimes your throat hurts because you want to cry, right? And it's cold, right? So this kind of sensation, you need to stimulate the senses, and you need to create questions that will stimulate the senses. Okay, and you need to leave it open so students will also do that. Okay, and you can do that with everything. Okay, for example, what sensation do you connect with Christmas? Yeah, but that's not a sensation. That's a feeling. What sensation do you connect with Christmas? Warmth. You connect warmth. What about you, Sebastian? What about with Christmas? You don't know what sensation, because you see, it's not easy to bring up this sensorial stimulus, right? Yeah, Teacher Gabi, what about you?
When I smell chocolate.
Exactly, you see, the smell of cinnamon and chocolate, right? Yeah, and it's very interesting that the sense of smell is very powerful. Yeah, for example, when I lived a year in the United States, and I lived in a very country area, and I always smell like pine trees and cinnamon, right? And every time my son buys this cereal and it smells, it reminds me of Maine, right, of the place where I was living, because it reminds me of it, because I had the smell. So you connect this with the smell. Smell is a very powerful sense, so you should try to connect that. Okay. For example, then you say, okay, what did you feel? You know, probably, I don't know. I felt a weird taste in my mouth, right? Yeah, it was difficult to swallow the salad. So all those things could be connected to that, right? Yeah. Yeah, and so you need to stimulate the sensation, right? Yeah, for example, I lost my key and I was in a hurry, so I felt warmth, right? Porque me está dando ira, si me calenté literalmente, right? Yeah, so you can see all of this, you need to stimulate your classmates, your students, and why do you do that? Because these senses are gonna help them write, yeah? Good. The students reflect individually, probably in 15 minutes. You give them the questions, and then depending on the class, you may allow them to go to somewhere where they can reflect on these questions, right? And then they write down the answers, and they use a specific. Then you ask them to write to start thinking about the lines and the words that are going to be included, right? And then they get together and they share and reflect on their answers. Okay, it's important that if possible, you allow the students to talk, to pick their own partners. Okay, so they feel more comfortable to share. Okay, and then stage number 4, you begin crafting the original poem. Okay, for example, you say, okay, you have these questions here, you have these answers, you have all of these emotions, right, all of these sensations. Now, as homework, notice that you send it as homework and then you finish it the next class. You cannot do it in one class. Okay, it's impossible because students are going to be tired, etc. Okay, so you begin as a homework. You say, okay, you're going to write 12 lines of poems with refrains because you want to emulate something that you saw, and the refrain is not difficult. Yeah? You repeat a word. Yeah, it can be based on the previous expressions. But if you want to go beyond that, that's also okay. Maybe the feelings will come differently. Okay. In this particular case, I wouldn't require meter, but if you want, you can say, okay, and I need you to at least one line to have this type of meter. Okay. And the following class, you give them 20 minutes to finalize the draft. Okay. The poems are supposed to be written anonymously, and you should give help if requested. Okay, you shouldn't go around and saying, how are you doing? Do you need help? No, you should wait. You should let them know. If you need help, let me know. Okay, you need to tell. I will not come to you if you don't ask. Okay, so you will only go if they ask. Y se cerró. Why? Why? Yes. Share. Oh, se cortó. Wait. Veamos si vuelvo a conectar. No problem. Yeah, we're almost finished anyways. Reconnect. Yeah. All right, and then the final part is publication. Okay, the idea is that the students feel that they can see and they feel proud of what they have done. Okay, share and analyze the students' poems. Poems are posted anonymously in the classroom like that. Then you ask students to go around and read the poems. Individually, they choose one poem to discuss it with its author. Authors are identified by students. So you choose one poem, and then students go around and say, who wrote this? And they sit down with that person and start talking, I understand this from your poem, but what is the real meaning? Remember that poems always go beyond the original meaning. Okay, and sometimes you're going to be surprised of what is the meaning. Okay, remember, I remember that there was a poem and there was a lot of white, and there was a lot of emotions like being brave and hurting. And then I talked to the author, and then she told me, well, this is about my first karate class. Okay, was nothing to do with it, right? But remember, you should ask them to do that, okay? And at the end, authors are supposed to name and submit their final versions, okay? Remember that on reflection and feedback, remember that poems are personal. Feedback production should not be detrimental to a student's motivation. If you give something, if you just be careful not to make them feel bad, especially you're working in high school. Okay, at university there are difficult level. I mean, sometimes it's easier for an adult to know when someone is joking and when someone is not. But even then, you can get in trouble, so always bear in mind, okay? Remember that they are very difficult. Writing poetry is going to be difficult for your students. So bear in mind that, you need to be flexible. Don't be harsh on grading, okay? Also, if you don't provide feedback correctly, then they can be interpreted as harsh criticism. Okay, if you say, for example, well, that's wrong, that it's going to be, okay, whatever, okay? Yeah, you're not going to do that again in their lives. So you need to choose the way to correctly approach your classmates, okay? Maybe you could say, well, I mean, this is really nice, but what about this? Okay, you should suggest, but not impose alternate versions, okay? Yes, okay, yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, good. Now, why is this important? There's always this connection between the difference between a good teacher and an excellent teacher. The excellent teacher, the teacher that you remember, teacher probably was that left a mark because he probably knew a lot or taught you a lot. So the idea is, as Belen said, Belen, right? It's not Belen. What is your name? Melanie, yeah, that's right, you were Melanie. Yeah, I'm sorry, as Melanie said, I have a lot of students, I'm sorry, okay? Yeah, I don't know the name, okay? So yes, yeah, so Melanie said, you're supposed to, if you know you're teaching something, it's your responsibility to know something, okay? And always think about when you're gonna have, I always do this example because I have a child, but when you have a child, do you want him to have a good teacher, you want him to have an excellent teacher? Or you, as a student, do you want to have a good teacher, or you want to have an excellent teacher? Or would you have wanted to have an excellent teacher instead of a good teacher? Okay? Yeah, and also it gives a very different outlook of English, right? It kind of shows that English, as I said, the real ownership, okay? English is not only a language that I can use and I need to learn to get a job, but it's a language that I can also use to express my own feelings. Okay, and that is the real ownership of the languages that Widdowson talks about, okay? Or talked about in his articles. He wrote a lot of them, okay? Good. Do you have any questions? We have a short time for questions. Do you have any questions? Was it confusing? Was it any element of the presentation that you didn't get? That you would like me to go over? You probably already knew that, a lot of you, because you had it in literature. So now you're refreshing, I hope. Yeah. Beatrice, where is Benedict? Where is Benedict? Where is Benedict? You don't know, you're supposed to know. You're supposed to know. All right. So, do you have any questions? No questions. Everything is clear. Yes.
Regarding about the lesson plan.
Yeah.
Which authors do you recommend work with the students, especially with children, maybe in high school?
Well, children, you work with children. You bring nursery rhymes. Yeah, nursery rhymes are a specific type. You're studying nursery. You just study nursery rhymes. Yes, Mother Goose rhymes. Yeah, there are very, very interesting nursery rhymes as well. And for teenagers, Robert Frost is a very nice balance between free verse and formal verse. Yeah, it's very interesting how he wrote. Walt Whitman can also be good. Yeah, if you like free verse, and the ones that you're studying as well. You always trust. For example, there are very good authors like Yeats. But he's probably too dense for them. Don't you're working with teenagers. I wouldn't recommend, for example, Edgar Allan Poe, right? Yeah, because everybody likes Edgar Allan Poe because they want to say, "Look at me, I'm weird," right? But don't be that person, okay? Yeah, just motivate the students in a different way. Yeah. So Robert Frost is really interesting. He brings a lot of nice discussions as well. For example, you read The Road Note Taking. It's a very nice poem also to bring. Okay, Elizabeth Bishop too. Yeah, good. All the ones that we studied as well. Remember, we studied last year, and the extra authors that I brought. Yeah, those are also very good. Yeah, good. Thank you for your question. Any other question? You're pulling your hair. You're not asking a question. Yes. No questions. Yes. All right, then. Thank you, I guess. Thank you. Very good. All right, thank you. All right, good. Thank you. Remember, if you have any questions, let me ask, okay? Ask me, or ask them to ask me. I don't care. Okay, good. Bye. Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you, teacher. Bye.
Thank you guys for coming. And I hope to see you next Thursday.